This team seems to be pretty well buttoned up. Do you recall seasons gone by in which it appears as though we know what the running back rotation is going to be? We're not necessarily that optimistic about the wide receiver production, but it seems to be fairly clear cut who's in play. The tight end position is a 1-2, definitely a 1-2 there. The offensive line, obviously the defense is locked in pretty much on all three levels. So where are you looking for the next month in regards to any kind of storylines or guys that need to break through?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most of it's depth. I mean, it's just how many guys do you have at each position? I think after last week, it's easy to say offensive line based on what Kirk is telling people, that offensive line he's comfortable with 7 guys. He said several times he thinks they have a chance at having 7 starting caliber offensive linemen. That's a luxury they haven't had in recent times. So, I don't think Kirk would ever use the term buttoned up to describe his team. I know he wouldn't, even prior to camp starting. But yeah, offensive line applies, linebacker it applies, right? You got 3 guys, the clear cut, Nick Jackson, Jay Higgins, and Kyler Fisher, and then talent behind those guys. But 3, again, starting caliber guys, maybe more. We just don't have the proven experience there. You mentioned running back. They got 4 guys who proved themselves. I think Kamari Moulton is going to play more than people maybe think. And I don't know what the future for Jazz Patterson is. I really like the young man. I thought it was odd that he lost weight. I'm going to hopefully get a chance to chat with Jazz at Media Day. But yeah, I mean, running back there, at least 4 deep. It looks like Terrell Washington's going to play a lot as a receiver. And you're right about receiver. Like, they don't have, like, who's going to be the star? I don't know that they have one. Kirk addressed that at Big Ten Media Days and said, I don't know that we need an NFL receiver. That'd be great, but we need
Well,
guys.
not to interrupt, Corey, I'm sorry, but I can answer that question right now. They don't have a star at wide receiver.
Well, I mean, maybe they'll have one emerge, right? Maybe Caleb Brown emerges. Maybe it's the young man, Jacob Gill from Northwestern. So I think that would probably be the biggest one, Mark, because I don't know that they're buttoned up at receiver. I mean, I could name 5 or 6 guys in play, and that tells me it's an open competition. It's not like, well, we have 5 or 6 guys to rotate. It's not like offensive line where Kirk apparently feels like they got 7 starters. I think they got maybe 6 or 7 guys at receiver where they got to figure out who are our best 3. Do we have 3 starting caliber receivers? So that would be the position I'd say number 1. And obviously you're curious about quarterback, and Sullivan or Linez make some sort of a push on Cade McNamara. I mean, I don't think a lot of people expect that to happen. I think most people expect Cade to be the starter week 1. I think Kirk expects Cade to be the starter at week 1. Hey, you mentioned tight end, and I think they go 3 deep clearly at tight end with Johnny Pascuzzi. Remember, he entered the portal during the offseason and then withdrew from the portal. So to me, you've got a clear top 3 there. And safety, yeah. I mean, you got 2 really experienced guys in Quinn Schulte and Xavier Wampa. You have, guys at corner, Jamari Harris, and then probably a battle for that other job between TJ Hall, Deshaun Lee, and John Nestor. So there's a battle to look for, but obviously Jamari is a cemented starter. And what am I missing? Defensive line. I think that is pretty much set in stone, barring injury, who the starters are. But the caveat with defensive line, as you know, Mark, is Iowa likes to run 7 or 8 guys at times. They don't have 7 or 8 guys right now that have proven themselves. So depth there, that's probably one of the bigger depth battle stories this fall camp. Depth that it will actually impact this season, the immediate future, with Y.A. Black, Aaron Graves in the middle, Ethan Herkett, Max Llewellyn on the outsides. Deontay Craig will be there. So there's 5 guys right there. Brian Allen, where does he mix in? Where does Jeremiah Pittman mix in? Who emerges? It's young, maybe on obvious passing situations. So there's storylines, but I agree with you. Like at the top of most of these positions, they're as buttoned up as they have been. And I think where they're buttoned up, they're as strong at those positions as they have been. Like, this isn't a year of just, well, you got your top 3 linebackers and they're all solid. No, they've got two potential All-Americans there at the top, and one guy one guy who put up ridiculous numbers last year in Jay Higgins and just got on another award watch list today, and then another guy, Nick Jackson, who's got a chance to break the all-time NCAA tackling record for a career. So yeah, they're super strong at a couple of these positions, linebacker being one, tight end being another, and then you just worry about injuries, but that's football.
Yeah, and with the injuries, if Kirk would like a little coaching advice from me, of course he doesn't need that. I'm just kidding. But I would think that because of this situation, with having a buttoned up starting lineup for the most part, 90% on both sides of the ball, that you're more concerned with, okay, it's not a defensive end battle. It's not a outside linebacker battle between these two or three guys. We've got a set lineup. We are simply preparing these guys, just making sure the rust is off. They're ready to go. So therefore, we can back off the throttle on all these established players for the entirety of August. Of course, they got to be pushed. It's football to prepare themselves for a physical 12 games going forward plus. But and of course, Kirk and his staff, they know the team and they know how to prepare players as well as anyone. But there's that we don't need to see player 1, 2, and 3 at inside linebacker go at it full throttle for weeks to see who's the best player, because we've got to find a starter. We got the starter, so we can kind of push him back, just make sure he's got the rust off. So there's much less chance that he's going to get hurt, and we get to see the backups more often, push them, develop them, get them ready in case there's an injury, and figure out who's going to emerge out of these 4 guys, let's say, for a particular backup position to see who's the best, and focus more on camp being that level decision-making process.
The Big Ten Network asked Kirk during its time with Coach Ferentz last week about how the experience at the top and kind of what you're talking about, the maturation, the veteran leadership of this group, how it affects, especially on the defensive end, how it affects preparation during fall camp. And Kirk acknowledged that it does affect them. It does change how he approaches certain things. And he said the biggest battle that they have on their hands, especially the defense, is complacency with guys that are this old and this experienced. And so that's a battle, but I also think it's fair to say that Kirk is likely, this staff is going to be very careful with guys. Like, you want to take rust off, but if there's guys at all dinged up, say Jay Higgins, gets a stinger during the first day of fall camp, they are going to be abundantly careful with all of these guys. They've played a lot of football, and I go back to what happened with Cade McNamara during Kids Day. Freak injuries can't always be planned for. But I think we all, well, maybe not all of us, I would say this, and I know Coach Patterson said it on the air, we'll never know what would have happened had Cade been healthy during those first 4 games. But when you are playing less than 100%, you're more prone to injury. Okay, that can be proven. So I'm not saying that Cade's injury was in direct relation to the injury he suffered during Kids Day, but those are the types of things you want your guys to be fresh. You want them to be sharp, but you also don't want them to be playing less than 100% and be prone to more serious injury. And so hey, here's the deal. I hope at Kids Day, I don't want anybody to be injured, but I hope we get a good look at guys like Carson Shire at linebacker, guys like Jaden Harrell at linebacker. I hope we can see all of these corners running against the ones and see who looks better. I don't know if you've seen this on social media, Mark, over the last week. Ever since Iowa put out a pre-fall camp depth chart, certain segments of social media have gone crazy. And I think most of it's tongue-in-cheek, but this huge thing about, oh my goodness, Iowa's got another white cornerback, another great white cornerback. I'm telling you, it's out there. I've seen it, because John Nestor was listed as your starting cornerback, and Iowa's produced 2 recent cornerbacks that happen to both be white to the league. So we got to make things white and black. But anyways, John Nestor is listed as a starter right now, but he's never been a starter. So it should be a fun competition this fall between him and two guys who have had longer time with the program. Deshaun Lee's, what, a third-year guy now? And TJ Hall, I believe, is a third-year guy. They all, I mean, both of those guys have played in Big Ten games, Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall. And so to have John Nestor listed above them, that does raise an eyebrow, but that makes me think, hey, we're going to have some healthy competition at that spot opposite of Jamari Harris. And what you said earlier rings true, Mark. Jamari's been a little injury prone at times. Okay. He was also off the field last year due to the gambling stuff. But if you have a trio of DBs that are competing for one spot on one side, you're going to be more equipped to deal with potential injury to a veteran like Jamari as the season goes on. And that's a position where Iowa typically runs through a number of guys through the season. It seems like corner is a position where guys get injured.
So let me ask you this, because I'm going back to what you point out from time to time concerning the way this defense is run, that you've got cornerback, and regardless of the talent on the other side that you're playing, they play their positions, correct?
Well, I think Phil's gotten, yes, but I think Phil has gotten a little bit more comfortable. We've seen him toy with that when he's got a cornerback that he trusts, like a Cooper DeJean. And I have to go back to the Ohio State game 2 years ago, but I believe Riley Moss, I think he followed, what's his name? Is it Jackson Smith and Jigba or Harrison? One of the guys, one of those two. Yeah. It didn't really matter because they're all ridiculously talented, but he's become a little less. I think he's been burned a time or two. I think back to 2018 against Purdue, they got burned like 4 or 5 times down the sidelines to the same receiver. And eventually at the end of that drive, I think Phil just was like, all right, I think it might have been Ojemudia. I don't remember it might have been Matt Hankins who was playing opposite the field. And, he was going with several young guys back to back to back, and none of them could defend this guy. And so he kind of went against the grain. So, Phil's got a little bit of stubbornness in him. And that's one thing that's made him great, but it's also one thing that's at times cost him. So I think I think his mindset's maybe a little bit more open to switching that. But yes, traditionally you have your left corner and you have your right corner, and they stay on their sides of the field.
Because in the situation we're talking about right now, what I'm envisioning is you've got Harris locked down on a spot. You got the other 3 guys battling for the other spot. It's not like, let's say you have 50 reps, 50, 7-on-7 or 11-on-11, where you're playing football, and you don't just say, well, Harris, you're playing 50 consecutive plays because that's your corner spot. No, he's established. He's the starter. Keep him sharp. Maybe he plays 15 plays, 20 plays instead of 50, and you work the other guys through on both sides and get them more reps.
Yeah, and I think that will happen. I think Phil is intelligent enough to know that, and he's had the experience of having one really solidified corner and having to deal with injuries and having to deal with snaps and reps during fall camp. So I would guess that will happen. And I don't know who's listed technically. The 4th corner is listed behind Jamari on the one side of the field. So I think there's going to be some flexibility. I guarantee you there will be. They're not going to breed 3 guys to play on one side of the field. I will say this, and it was brought to my attention here recently, that when you look at what this offense is able to do, pre-snap motion, all that stuff, we saw a little bit of that in the spring. And the defense, I remember interviewing a couple of these players down on the field after that open practice, and they brought up the fact that it's put a heavier burden on even some of the more experienced guys to figure out what the offense is doing pre-snap. I think that's going to be a storyline to follow during fall camp, especially for these young guys. And they've got to, I was blessed with experience there at your most important positions like free safety and middle linebacker. But I'd have to think that I was going to use some serious time in this fall camp to get some of these younger guys who are totally green and don't have a lot of past experience to either fall back on, or perhaps could act as a hindrance because you're learning to play against a new system in practice. I think these young guys are going to be tested upstairs mentally because of all the pre-snap stuff that Tim Lester's offense throws at him. And that just wasn't the case under Brian. Now, how much will that impact how they play on Saturdays once you get into Big Ten play? I'm not some X's and O's guru to tell you how many offenses in the conference run the amount of pre-snap stuff that Tim's does, but that's going to be something I think there's a lot of. If you had to ask Kirk Ferentz, he'd probably give you a list of 50 things that they have on their list to figure out this fall camp.